to the life and times of Pinky Calhoun and, of course, StoneCabinAdventures. We are on episode 22. Can you believe that, people? 22. I'm amazed. I still have people listening and commenting and liking. I'm overwhelmed. I'm humbled. Chapter 19. Sheriff Bustos. Dead? You're sure? He stared at me like I killed that despicable creature my own self. Despicable had been one of the 8th graders' spelling words. We nearly never used that word at home. It seemed to me this occasion called for it. Near as I could tell. I hadn't brushed my hair in days. I'm pretty sure I looked a bit despicable my own self. My early morning adventure in the river had not done my curls any favors. Miss Calhoun, I need you to tell me why you think Rufus Gates is dead. And I need to know why you think he's anywhere around here. He and his pa both disappeared in the big storm. He motioned to the chair across the desk from his. He had stood up when Elmer and Annie and I came in. Most men in this town stood up when a lady entered a room. I didn't feel very ladylike, but I curtsied anyway. Elmer wiggled Annie's legs where she sat on his shoulders. I'm taking her with me to Kruger's. Oh, don't do that. I knew how Mr. Kruger felt about Annie. I didn't want her around anybody who could be rude to a baby. I want to show my baby sister to Adam. Mr. Kruger didn't want Emmy to touch her, probably on account of her ma and her pa aren't and weren't married to each other. I spat out the door. Every time I thought of Mr. Kruger, I remembered how horrible his breath smelled. It nearly made me gag. I caught Sheriff Bustos grinning at me. When I looked directly in his face, he laughed out loud. Do you remember the day you threw coffee on Les Portwell? Well, I didn't know his name. He was mean to Emmy. The way Elmer twitched, he needed to use the outhouse or find a bush to hide behind. I let him take Annie and go. Sometimes it felt like I was the big sister. Yep, Lester Portwell. I decided that day that I liked you. I bet with myself that you'd have thrown coffee on him even if he hadn't been behind bars. I would have thrown the whole pot on him if you hadn't chased me out of here. He laughed really big before he said, So, have a seat and tell me why you think Rufus is dead. I squirmed backwards into his chair. My feet stuck out the front side. I guessed his chairs had been made for grown-up men. May I have a cup of coffee? As an afterthought, I added, Please? He tried not to smile, but snorted. Promise not to throw it on me? I giggled. I promise. Your pa let you drink that stuff? He would if he were home. I clapped my hand over my mouth. He walked over to the stove and poured me a cup of hot coffee. Where is J.T. Calhoun? Me and Elmer hadn't talked much about letting people know we were living alone out at the farm, since I'd let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. I guessed I could give him a few more bits of the truth. He's doing a little bit bounty hunting, tracking down wicked criminals. He tracking down anyone I might know? He handed me that cup of coffee. But then, instead of going around his desk and sitting in his chair, he leaned on the edge of the desk right close to me. I struggled for an answer that didn't let him know we were on our own. Don't you know all the bed men? I mean, isn't that your job? I sipped my coffee. It was just as nasty as I remembered from when Emmy and I sang here. I took another swallow and grimaced. You make terrible coffee. When I get to be mayor, you'll have to come to my office when you need to see me so we can have good coffee while we talk. Your mom make good coffee? The best. It wasn't a lie. We had all enjoyed coffee with our breakfast on that last morning together. I'll have to ask her how she makes it. Well, she doesn't buy that nasty stuff from Kruger's. A friend of hers in St. Louis sends it to her. I read the packages. It doesn't have chicory in it. The look on his face said, aha. The look on mine must have said something bad. We've completely forgotten to pick up her coffee deliveries at the train station. I made a note in my head to take care of that today. Also, we needed to get a coffee pot. I decided right then to hold Annie and let Elmer go in Kruger's and buy us a new coffee pot. I didn't want our baby to be anywhere near Mr. Kruger and his horrible breath and his worse attitude. So, go on. Tell me why you think Rufus is dead. By the way, don't let anyone else know you're glad he's dead. Not good form if you hope to be the mayor. I nodded. That was something Governor Pitkin would have told me, too. I sucked in all the breath I could hold. After a bit, I let it all puff out of my mouth and blow my hair out of my eyes. It fell right back down in my face. Hold on. He went around his desk and pulled a string out of one of his drawers. It had probably tied together something he bought at Kruger's. He smoothed my hair back like Pa used to do. He wound that string from my scalp down to the ends of my hair. His hands were rough like Pa's and felt so good and hurt my heart so bad. My ponytail reached my waist. I had no idea my hair had grown that long. I cried because it reminded me how much I missed Pa. My heart shrunk up so it must have got smaller than Annie's. It tightened up and nearly choked me. He handed me a clean hanky and finally sat down in his sheriff chair. He waited a bit and sipped his nasty coffee, but then he made a noise that meant it was my turn to talk. Never swim alone. I looked at him and sniffled. That is Pa's rule, but I have, and I probably will again. Last summer, I seen a bunch of boys swimming. I wanted to swim with my friends too, but most girls can't swim. And I can't swim naked like Robert and the other boys did. I had to wait till they were gone. I swung out on that rope, Sheriff Bustos. I thought I'd done died and gone to heaven. Swinging from that rope was so much fun. Anyway, I dove clear to the bottom. That's when I seen that big fish I've been telling everybody about. I thought it was going to eat me. I kicked it as hard as I could to make it shut its mouth. It worked. That fish smacked me with its tail, but it swam away. I've been trying to catch it ever since. He cleared his throat, then growled. You saw Robert swimming naked? I nodded. That was before I knew about the big fish. His face changed from normal to red and then back to normal pretty quick. I hope I hadn't gotten Robert in trouble. I bet that fish remembers you. Get somebody else to bait your hook. If bait smells like getting kicked in the chin instead of supper, it may never bite your hook. He raised one eyebrow, daring me to disagree. It seemed reasonable that the fish would try to stay away from me, so I nodded. Okay, you're probably right, but we keep catching big fish anyway, just not the monster big one. It's bigger around it than Fatty. He laughed like Fatty was a real person. Who you call him Fatty? Fat Mama, our girl pig. Pa named her. She's going to have lots of babies when she gets married, but she ain't had any yet. We don't have a boy pig except Bacon Boy, and he's only a boy pig, not a man pig. We stared at each other in silence for a moment. When it got uncomfortable, he asked, You swim alone often? I puffed out my air again. I know better, and Pa will for sure tan my hide. I puffed out my air again. I know better, and Pa will for sure tan my hide if you tell him. I hadn't gone swimming after the bad storm, not till this morning. I got some of Elmer's rope, and I swung from that tree again. This time, I didn't see any big fish. I saw a floating man. I could hold my breath a long time. I smirked and felt Uppity come all over me. I've practiced. I floated down the river, looking up into his dead face. Some blood leaked from his chest, but he just let the river carry him. I went up and got me a good breath and went back under to watch him. He never came up for air. I realized I'd been looking at my boots instead of Sheriff Bustos' face. I made a point of looking at him. Do dead men bleed? He closed his eyes and made that same expression that Pa makes when Ma says he's commending his soul to God. Then he answered, not very long, but if they're fresh dead, they can leak for a little while. How long do you suppose it would take him to float from our house to here? Instead of answering me, he yelled for his deputy. Krueger, go watch the river for a body. He turned and looked at me. What was he wearing? Dark boots, his feet kind of hung down in the water, homespun pants like he always wore, and a blue shirt. He had a flowery neckerchief tied around his neck. It was hard to tell what color from under the water. The sun hadn't come up real far yet. I'd guess green, like faded leaves. Deputy Krueger came out of the cell where he'd been napping and stared at me for what seemed like forever. You drowned somebody your own self, did you? Must have been a little kid of a scrawny runt like you bested him. I rolled my eyes before answering him. Pshoo, no. I seen him, though. He challenged me. So, if you seen him, who was he? He hopped around trying to put on boots without socks. Rufus Gates, I done told your boss that. If you woke up at a reasonable hour, you could have heard the story the first time I told it. He was leaking blood. I got out of there quick when Turtle started nibbling him. I didn't want nibbled, too. After the deputy left, Sheriff Bustos said, Don't go sounding all uppity when you explain things. He'll probably never vote for you now. So he can be uppity to me, but I can't be uppity back to him? He don't want elected to nothing. Sheriff Bustos cocked one eyebrow up in the air like Elmer does when he thinks I might be exaggerating a little bit. Right then I wondered, how bad did I want to be mayor? I sighed. I wanted it bad enough to quit being uppity. Yes, sir. A cup of coffee later, Robert burst in through the door. Uncle Tony, Krueger says there's a dead man in the river. He thinks it's that mean old Rufus. They're trying to rope him to pull him out. After the blood drained from my face, I drained what was left of my coffee and I stood. You want I should come back later? You have business that just won't wait. Then it was his turn to sigh. I'll catch up with you if I have questions. Anytime. You know where we live. His face went as blank as Mrs. Harkin's blackboard right before a spelling test. Actually, I don't know where you live. He looked puzzled. I mean, the storm and all. Your cabin's gone. Oh, we live in the same place. We just live in the Root Cellar for now. I wanted to say something nice to him, so I added, Paul says you can track passable well. You'll find us. I knew instantly that was the right thing to say. He swelled up with pride. I could see it. He stood straighter and pulled his shoulders back. I guess Paul's opinion of tracking abilities was a good standard to measure by. We both left his office. I waved to his back as he trotted off toward the river. Caught up with Elmer. He sat on the bench out in front of the saloon. He held the baby out to me. Mr. Krueger won't let me take Annie in the store. He won't even let me sit in front of his store. You hold her while I go back in there. I don't know how I got so angry just hearing those few words. No one owned the benches and the sidewalks. Walsenburg had paid for them to be built. My chest felt like it might explode. My face turned purple. I could feel it. I screamed at him. If my sister isn't welcome in there, my money isn't either. It's because she's a bastard. I exploded. No, it's because he's won. He thinks he's so much better than her. He didn't pick his parents, and she didn't either. People clear over in Leaking Rock could probably have heard me. My red-headed anger just took over. I took my sister away from Elmer, and I stomped off toward Kruger's store. Elmer trotted next to me, begging, Pinky, don't go making him angry. Lots of people here in town respect him. I spun right in the middle of the street to confront Elmer face to face. Lots of people around here in town act like they respect him because they owe him money. They don't dare make him mad. He'll call their notes. That's why Pa don't do debt. We don't owe him a thing. Not a dime and not a single nice word. We don't owe him nothing at all. As I started to barge in through the door, Adam stopped me. Come with us. We're going down to the river. Deputy Krueger found a dead body. I shook my head and made a rude noise. Krueger only found him because Sheriff Bustos told him to go look for it. I know all about the body. It's Rufus Gates. He got shot in the chest earlier this morning. He's been nibbled by turtles, so he may not look much like he used to. Gosh, Pinky, how do you know all that? His eyebrow made that same shape as Elmer's and the sheriff's. I wondered if my eyebrow ever did that. Because I saw him first. Where? The way he said it made it more of an argument than a question. So I answered his challenge. By the big tree, where you and Elmer and your friends swing from the rope when you swing naked. My face should have turned red, but by then I was so angry with his paw that it couldn't get any redder. Adam's face got nearly as red as mine. While Adam wrapped his brain around the thought that I'd not just seen but watched him skinny dipping, his paw came out the store. Here, don't bring that bastard in here. Mr. Kruger shoved me backwards to keep Annie out of his store. Even though he had slapped me before, I didn't expect him to touch me. I figured he'd learnt better when Pa knocked sense into him. He shoved, and I fell backwards. My hind end landed just past the edge of the top step. I rolled backwards, holding Annie as tight as I could. My feet and my skirts went up over my head, but I couldn't stop rolling. Each step left a bruise across my back. My toes caught on the edge of the bottom step, and I landed flat on my back in the street with Annie on top of me. Well, we weren't in the middle of the street, but close. It was like being smacked by that fish again. All the air in the world left me alone in the street with a baby laying on my chest. I rode her off of me. I held on to her dress so she couldn't get away. I counted to 83 before I could breathe smooth again. Annie should have been squalling, but she was laughing instead. Anger bloomed inside my head and my chest. Several hands stood me up. I shook myself, leaving Annie sitting in the dirt. Mostly my skirts fell back down where they belonged. Elmer stayed close to us. Adam went back inside the store. I heard his pa bellowing at him as he sent him upstairs. Before I could head back up the steps, I ran smack into a brick wall. It felt as solid as a wall in our cave. Billy Joe McClendon blocked my path. He knelt in front of me and smoothed my hair. He talked about how redheads have to stick together. He eased a pair of tongs from Mr. Gosling's shop into my left hand. I nodded. Billy Joe kissed my forehead before whispering, "Help him learn not to mess with the Calhoun or with my friends or with my daughter. If we don't stand up for her, people like him will make her life miserable." If Mr. Kruger could have seen Billy Joe's and my eyes, he would have run for the hills. Being a southpaw has very few benefits. People watching your right hand instead of your business hand is one of them. I stomped up the stairs holding those tongs left-handed in the folds of my skirt. Mr. Krueger stood his ground. I remember part of a poem that Mrs. Harkin had read to us. I don't remember who it was about, but it said, "He doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus." I still didn't know what a colossus was, but I recognized bestriding when I saw it. He had his fists planted on his hips. His feet were spread wide apart. His nasty breath reached me before I got all the way to the top of the stairs. I stopped on the first step down. I shook my right fist up at him and roared. That's the best way I know to describe it. There simply weren't enough words to tell him how mean and evil he was. He tipped back his head and blasted out a mean laugh. When he tipped his head backwards to laugh at me, he wasn't looking at me. I swung that set of tongs with both hands. I smashed them into the side of his leg at his knee. He sucked in air and squawked like a choking turkey. He held his damaged leg up. He made gurgly moaning sounds. I stepped up onto the boardwalk and swung even harder from the other direction. I knew I wasn't strong enough to break his leg, but I tried. With God as my witness, I tried. I slammed those tongs into the front of his other knee and tried to break either his leg or the tongs. He landed on one hip and rolled onto his back. I wanted to hit him in the throat or in the face, but I forced myself to turn away from him. It was a huge struggle to go back down those stairs without pounding on Mr. Krueger more. I traded Billy Joe for Annie before I could change my mind about hitting Mr. Krueger again. I sat our baby on my shoulders and headed home. I could hear laughter behind me. I was so upset I forgot to get our coffee from the depot. I was ashamed of myself. People were laughing at me. I'd blown any chance I had at becoming mayor. As if having red hair and being cack-handed weren't bad enough, I'd become a laughingstock. Everyone had seen my bloomers when I tumbled backwards down the stairs. I knew they had seen them, and I knew that was why they laughed. Annie twisted her fingers into my hair. I held on to her feet and trudged to the cabin. Except we didn't have a cabin, not anymore. Trudge had been someone's spelling word, but I was so upset I couldn't remember whose. 10,427 steps later, I quit counting. Halfway home, Bossy wandered up to join us on our furious little journey to the Root Cellar. Annie went to sleep, and I had to carry her with her whole weight in my arms. Before the tornado wiped us out, I hadn't been strong enough to carry her that far. Now my muscles showed up well. I'd seen Elmer and Adam and their friends comparing muscles. I had better muscles than any boy my age. I put Annie down in the grass I'd stored in the cave and took an armload out to Bossy. Elmer should have come home with us, or beat me there. We needed to stick together. I knew he hadn't bought anything at Kruger's. I had my pocket with my hearts tied around my middle. I whined to myself all the way home about how horrible Mr. Kruger's breath smelled, how mean he was to Annie. I told myself I didn't care how he treated me, but truth rose up in me like fire in a dry cedar tree. I did care. I didn't want Sheriff Bustos to arrest me for hitting Mr. Krueger. I knew Emmy's pa would press charges if he could. Maybe the fact that everyone laughed at me would make him feel better about his bruised legs. Maybe. I hoped I didn't have to spend the rest of my life in jail. There's probably a rule about the mayor or the governor not living in the jail. Thank you so much for listening. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. Thank you so much for listening. I absolutely love Pinky, and I love you, but Jesus loves you more. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Mwah.